Imagine a device that could change the world. A small black box that promised to detect hundreds of diseases with just a drop of blood. Investors called it revolutionary. Silicon Valley called it the future. The media crowned its founder the next Steve Jobs. But behind the polished stage lights and billion-dollar headlines was a secret so dark it would unravel into one of the most shocking scandals in business history. This isn't just a story about failed technology. It's about ambition, deception, and how a dream turned into a billion-dollar lie. In 2003, a 19-year-old Stanford dropout named Elizabeth Holmes stepped into Silicon Valley with an idea that promised to change the world. She spoke of a small device, no bigger than a desktop printer, that could test hundreds of diseases with just a single drop of blood. Investors saw her not as a college dropout, but as the next Steve Jobs. Draped in black turtlenecks and speaking with a strangely deep, calculated voice, Holmes created an image of genius and authority. Her company, Theranos, became the golden child of Silicon Valley, a symbol of innovation and disruption. But behind the bright promises, a billion-dollar lie was beginning to take shape. By 2013, Theranos wasn't just another Silicon Valley startup. It was a juggernaut. Elizabeth Holmes raised hundreds of millions of dollars from some of the most powerful men in America, former secretaries of state, four-star generals, billionaires, and media moguls. Magazines called her the youngest self-made female billionaire. She graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune World. Leaders shook her hand, celebrities endorsed her vision, and Walgreens agreed to roll out Theranos machines across its pharmacies nationwide. Holmes became a symbol of innovation and female empowerment in tech. To the outside world, Theranos was the future of medicine. But inside those glossy walls, the cracks were already starting to show. Behind Theranos' polished image, the reality was far darker. Inside the company's labs, scientists and lab techs began noticing troubling signs. The Edison machine, the sleek device Elizabeth promised could perform hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood, didn't work as advertised. The results were wildly inaccurate. Some patients received false positives for serious diseases, others false negatives that could have cost them their lives. To cover up these failures, Holmes and her inner circle allegedly ordered employees to use commercial lab machines from competitors, secretly diluting blood samples to make them work. The culture at Theranos became one of fear and silence. Employees who questioned results were threatened, spied upon, or fired. Holmes enforced strict secrecy, banning departments from communicating with one another. Even high-ranking executives admitted they had no idea how the technology actually functioned. Yet outside, the company's image remained untarnished. Holmes spoke at conferences, her voice steady, her black turtleneck mirroring Steve Jobs' investors, and the public still believed, because Theranos' story was simply too good to doubt. But inside, pressure was building. The more the machines failed, the more desperate the cover-ups became. The house of cards was trembling, but no one on the outside knew it yet. By 2015, the cracks at Theranos could no longer be ignored. Inside the company, a few brave employees decided they couldn't stay silent any longer. One of them was Tyler Shultz, the grandson of George Shultz, a former U.S. Secretary of State and one of Theranos' most influential board members. Tyler had joined Theranos with optimism, believing in Holmes' vision. But what he saw inside the labs shocked him. Test results that didn't match, data being manipulated, and patients potentially put at risk. When he raised his concerns to company leadership, he was met with hostility. Lawyers from the powerful firm Boies Schiller were unleashed to intimidate him. Theranos' security team began following whistleblowers, monitoring their movements, and pressuring them into silence with legal threats. Another insider, Erica Cheung, also came forward. She described how patients were being given dangerous results, including false HIV positives and cancer misdiagnoses. Both Tyler and Erica knew speaking out could destroy their careers, but they felt a responsibility to the truth and to the lives that could be harmed. Meanwhile, Holmes doubled down. To the media and investors, she presented unwavering confidence, but behind the glass walls of Theranos, fear had become the company's currency. And soon, those whispers of dissent would reach the ears of a dogged journalist, setting the stage for Theranos' unraveling. When whispers grow loud enough, they reach the right ears. In 2015, John Carreyrou, a seasoned investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, received a tip. Theranos might not be what it claimed. At first, even Carreyrou found it hard to believe. After all, Theranos was backed by billionaires, generals, and some of the most trusted figures in America. But the more he dug, the more inconsistencies he found. Sources inside Theranos, frightened but desperate to reveal the truth, told him about faulty machines, fabricated data, and a culture of fear and intimidation. Carreyrou's investigation wasn't easy. Holmes, backed by her powerful legal team, tried everything to stop him. Lawyers sent threatening letters. Theranos officials demanded meetings with the journal's editors, and Holmes herself personally called Rupert Murdoch, who not only owned the newspaper, but had invested $125 million in Theranos. Still, Carreyrou persisted. He cross-checked evidence, verified testimonies, and built a case so airtight that even Holmes's charm couldn't spin her way out. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published its first explosive article. The story shattered Theranos's carefully crafted image, sending shockwaves through Silicon Valley, the medical community, and Wall Street alike. But this was only the beginning. Once the truth was out, regulators, doctors, and patients demanded answers. For Elizabeth Holmes, the empire was starting to collapse, one headline at a time. After the Wall Street Journal's bombshell expose, the facade of Theranos began to unravel at lightning speed. Patients who had trusted the company's revolutionary promises stepped forward, revealing devastating stories of misdiagnoses and false results. Doctors began questioning the credibility of the tests, and medical experts demanded answers. The most powerful blow came from regulators, the Centers for Medicare. Medicaid Services, CMS, launched an inspection of Theranos's labs. What they found was damning: unsafe practices, unreliable equipment, and results so flawed they posed immediate jeopardy to patient health. By early 2016, CMS revoked Theranos's license to operate its California lab and banned Holmes from owning or operating a medical laboratory for 2 years. Walgreens, once poised to be Theranos's nationwide partner, severed ties and demanded repayment. Lawsuits poured in from investors and patients alike. The company's value, once nearly $9 billion, collapsed almost overnight. Employees left in droves, former allies distanced themselves, and the once celebrated Silicon Valley icon was now branded a fraud. Yet, through it all, Elizabeth Holmes kept insisting she would fix the problems and rebuild Theranos. But the walls were closing in, the empire she had built on lies was crumbling piece by piece, and there was no saving it. For years, Elizabeth Holmes denied everything. She insisted the press had exaggerated, that regulators had misunderstood, that her vision was still alive. But in 2018, the U.S. government made its move. Holmes and former Theranos president Ramesh Sunny Balwani were indicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. The trial that followed became one of the most closely watched courtroom dramas in Silicon Valley history. Prosecutors painted Holmes as a manipulative con artist who knowingly deceived patients, investors, and doctors. They showed evidence of doctored reports, misleading demonstrations, and emails that contradicted her public promises. Holmes' defense team told a different story. They argued she was a well-meaning entrepreneur who truly believed in her technology, but was let down by her scientists and betrayed by Balwani. They even suggested she was a victim of an abusive relationship, an argument that divided public opinion. Inside the packed courtroom, every detail was scrutinized. Holmes's calm expressions, her deep baritone voice, her unwavering claim that she never intended to deceive reporters filed daily updates. Headlines dominated the news cycle, and the world watched to see if Silicon Valley's female Steve Jobs would finally be held accountable. The trial dragged on for months, with dramatic testimonies from whistleblowers, investors, and patients who said their lives were put at risk. By the time the jury was handed the case, the myth of Theranos was long gone. What remained was the question of justice. In January 2022, after months of testimony and 7 full days of jury deliberations, the world finally got its answer. Elizabeth Holmes, once the youngest self-made female billionaire, was found guilty on 4 counts of fraud and conspiracy. The verdict was historic. For years, Silicon Valley had been known for its fake-it-till-you-make-it culture, where hype often mattered more than results. But in Holmes' case, the jury decided there was a line, and she had crossed it by deliberately misleading investors and putting patients at risk. She had turned ambition into criminal fraud. Inside the courtroom, Holmes showed little emotion as the verdict was read. Outside, the media swarmed. Some saw her conviction as long overdue justice. Others viewed her as a tragic figure, consumed by her obsession to be the next Steve Jobs. The trial also sent shockwaves through the startup world. Founders and investors began asking hard questions. How many other companies were built on smoke and mirrors? Could Silicon Valley's culture of exaggeration survive this kind of reckoning? For Holmes, the dream was over. Once hailed as a visionary, she now stood as a warning, a reminder that even in the world of billion-dollar startups, truth still matters. In November 2022, Elizabeth Holmes returned to the courtroom for the final time, not to defend her actions, but to face the consequences of them. Her lawyers pleaded for leniency, arguing that she was a young visionary who had lost her way, not a hardened criminal. They pointed to her new life as a mother, asking the court for mercy. But prosecutors pushed back hard. They reminded the judge that Holmes had risked patient lives, manipulated investors, and lied repeatedly to the public. They demanded accountability. When the sentence was read, the courtroom fell silent. 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. For many, it was a landmark moment, proof that even Silicon Valley's brightest stars could not escape justice. The aftermath rippled far beyond Holmes herself. Theranos was officially dissolved. Its investors lost billions. Walgreens, once a key partner, faced lawsuits of its own. Patients were left to wonder how their medical decisions had been influenced by faulty results. Holmes appealed her conviction, but in May 23, she reported to a federal women's prison in Texas to begin her sentence. For the woman who once promised to change the world, the reality was stark. Her billion-dollar empire had ended in a prison cell. Elizabeth Holmes's downfall was more than just the story of a failed startup. It was a cultural reckoning. For years, Silicon Valley celebrated bold visions, flashy promises, and disruptive ideas. Often without demanding proof, Holmes exploited that culture. She dressed like Steve Jobs, spoke like a prophet, and sold a dream so powerful that billionaires, politicians, and global corporations lined up to believe her. But Theranos left scars. Investors lost billions. Walgreens, once a trusted partner, faced lawsuits. Patients were shaken, realizing their health had been put at risk for the sake of hype. And the public was left wondering how so many smart, experienced people could have been deceived by a story that seemed too good to be true. Today, Theranos stands as a cautionary tale. It's taught regulators to scrutinize startups more carefully, investors to demand real data, and the public to question the myths of Silicon Valley. Holmes' legacy is not one of innovation, but of warning, a sign that the pursuit of greatness without honesty can turn vision into catastrophe. And so, the billion-dollar lie that once promised to change the world became a lesson for generations. In the end, truth matters more than dreams.